How are you developers? I trust you are all fine today. Welcome to today's class. We'll be learning about CSS transform and transition properties. I hope you enjoy the class, so stay tuned. If you have been following these course, you are aware of the repo that we forked, where we usually get our resources that we use in the course. So if you are new, I'll just put the link of that repo in the video description for you to clone the repo and access today's notes. So that much ado, let's dive in. Once you have pulled the changes, or if you have cloned the repo, if you're new, you'll see a folder written 09 transformation and transitions. That is the folder we will be using today, and you can see inside the folder there's this readme file, and the readme file contains the notes that we'll use in this class. We'll talk about CSS transforms and CSS transitions. So that much ado, let me just create these files. I just create my index.html file. And my style sheet. Then in the HTML file, I'll create my boilerplate. Then rename the title to CSS transform and transitions. Also, I'll link my HTML to my CSS using that line of code. Then I'll just save. I'll also open this readme using my markdown previewer, like that. So you can see I have my index.html file here, my style sheet here, and my notes here on the right. So I think I'm set to start the class. So let us start learning about CSS transforms. As you can see in the notes, the CSS transform property allows you to move, rotate, scale, and skew elements. So with this transform property, you can do all this, and we'll see how you can do each one of them in just a few moments. So first, we look at how to do the translate. To translate is just to move an element. So the translate function is used to move an element from its current position according to the given parameters that you give the x and the y. So let us see how you can translate an element. So I'll just write a heading here. I'll say translate function, because the translate is a function. Then below it I'll create a div. Then I'll give the div a class of container. Then I'll come in the style sheet and link and style my container. I'll give it a height and a width, because we said when an element does not have any content, we must provide the height and the width for the elements to be visible. Give it a height of 100 pixels. Also, I'll give it a border 2 pixels, solid red, like that. So let me run my browser. I'll just also add the transform property here also. I'll just say transform, then transform, I'll say translate, because we're talking about translate here. Then I'll translate. So translate moves an element. So by how many pixels do I want to move the element? So this translate takes two values. The first is for the x value, the next is for the y value. So how many pixels do I want to move my element in the x-axis? So I'll say maybe here something like 100 pixels. I want it to move 100 pixels in the x-axis, maybe just 50 pixels in the y-axis. So I'll just see how that is. I'll go to the browser and see how that is. If you go to the browser, you can see that our element is here, but it has moved a little bit in the x and the y axis. Let me just inspect. I show you how it has moved. You can see here in the developer options, Where is that div? The div is here. You can see it has this transform translate property here. So if I turn it off, you can see that is the usual position where it's supposed to be. But I told it to move 50 pixels in the Y, so it will move 50 pixels from the top. Then 100 pixels in the X, so it will move a little bit in the left side, like that. And that is how you can use the translate. Also, there's this translate X and translate Y. So translate, you provide both the X and the Y values. But if you want to move it, you can see if I just provide one value, it will work. Okay. But there's this translate X also. Translate X moves only in the X. And then there's translate Y that moves it only along the Y axis. You can see if I put translate Y, the Y axis is moving, but the X is not moving. And I put translate X, it only moves the X axis. And that is it with the translate. So let's look at another element, that is I think it's the rotate. That is the next element that we look at. So let's look at the next function. So the next function is the rotate. And the rotate, like the function says, it rotates an element, but it rotates it in clockwise or anti-clockwise, or anti is also called counterclockwise. So it rotates an element either clockwise or anti-clockwise according to a given degrees. But if you use the negative value in the rotate, it will rotate it in the counterclockwise. So let's see how that rotate is used. So I'll just replace this translate. I'll just remove the translate and put rotate like that. Then I can say rotate maybe by 20 degrees. So let me save this code and go to the browser and see how the rotate looks like. So if you go to the browser, you can see that our element has rotated 20 degrees towards the right, that is the clockwise direction. But if I put this degrees to be negative, for example I say negative 20, you can see it rotates in the opposite direction. It rotates in the anti-clockwise direction. And that is how you can change the direction, by providing either a negative value or a positive value inside the rotate function. And that is it with the rotate. There's also rotate X and rotate Y. So if I put here rotate X, it will rotate in the X axis alone. So if I say rotate X something like 20 degrees, you can see does not change. But you can see if I adjust these values, you can see how the rotate X works. It rotates in the X axis alone. Also I can just provide here rotate Y like that. And you can see if I put rotate Y, let me just click on this degrees, you can see how the rotate Y rotates. It rotates only on the Y axis. That is how the rotate X and rotate Y work. But this rotate by itself, it rotates both the X and the Y at the same time. And that is, you can see it rotates both the X and the Y. And that is how you can use the rotate. So let's look at the next element, the next function. And the next function is the scale function. So the scale function, as you can see in the notes, it decreases or increases the size of an element according to the parameters given. And just like the rotate, just like the transform, if you say scale, the first value you put there is for the scale X, the next value is for the scale Y. So if I say 2, 3, this value, the first value is for the X value, the next value is for the Y value. So let's go to the browser and see how this will work. So if you go to the browser, you can see that our div is out of control. So where is it? I think this one is not updated. It's supposed to be scale, yeah. So let me just put the scale X to be 1 and also Y to be 1. That is the usual. That is how our container was. But if I put this to be 2, 0, it won't be visible. To be 2, you can see it has increased the Y value twice. And that is how the scale works. If I adjust, you have said the scale increases or reduces. So if I need to reduce this, I can say something like 0.5 and it will be half the width or the X value. So also this I can put a decimal here, let's say 0.2 and it will be very small. So that is how you can increase the size of an element or reduce the size of an element using the scale. Also, you've said this scale, the first value is for the x value, the next value is for the y value. But if you only want to increase the x value, you can use the scale x and provide only one value for that function. And this value will only work with the x. If I say 1, only x will be 1. I say 2, only the width is changing, the height is remaining constant. If I 0.5, you can see the width is the one that is changing, the height is remaining constant. There's also this one called scale y. It scales only the y axis. So if I say 1, you can see that is the usual. Say 1.5, you can see the height has increased by half. If I say 2, the height will double. If I say something like 0.5, the height will be half the initial size. And that is how you can adjust the size of elements using the scale function. The next function that we'll talk about is the skew function. This one here. And skew, I can say it skews an element along the x or y axis. To skew, I can't say it's to bend, but it's to skew. Let me show you how the skew looks like. So if I go to the browser and say skew, I have to provide the value of the x. By how many degrees do you want to skew the x, and how many degrees do you want me to skew the y? So maybe I'll say just 20 degrees for the x and just 10 degrees for the y. So let me save this and let us go to the browser and see how that will look like. I noticed that I've not been changing this h1 here, but I'll just remove it and just write something like transform property. Instead of writing a specific function, I'll just write here transform property when you go back to our VS Code. But you can see how the skew looks like. You can see the x has been skewed by 20 degrees and the y has been skewed by 10 degrees. But if you only want to skew just a specific one, let's say I want to skew only x, I'll write skew x, then I'll just provide only one value like that. And you can see the div is now something like a parallelogram. And if I put here skew y, and maybe I provide the value for y, it will skew only the y axis. That is how the skew works. So let's go back to our VS Code and change this h1 here and look at the next function. Notice that I've been teaching different functions, but the heading was just saying translate function. So I'll just change it to something like transform property, so that all those functions are for the transform property. I've said the transform property can either move an element, and for it to move, you've seen that it uses the translate. It can rotate an element using the rotate function. It can increase the size of an element using the scale function. It can skew an element using the skew function. So now let us look at the matrix. And this matrix combines all the 3D transformations into one. And it takes 6 parameters containing the mathematical functions which allows you to rotate, scale, move. In short, this matrix is just a shorthand for all the property. So if I want a shorthand for all the property, I can say here something like matrix. Then I can provide the values for the scale x, scale y, skew, and the rest. So I just say here 1, then something like 0. Let me just put a negative value, 0.3. Then I can say it should not move in the x. Then maybe 1, then 0, also the last one 0. And that is how you put the matrix. You put different values for all the skew, scale, transform, all of them, you put them together. So let's see how this will look like in the browser. So if you go to the browser, you can see that our element has been applied with all those properties. The first property here, this one, was for the horizontal scaling. Horizontal. This one was for the horizontal skewing. This 0 was for the vertical skewing. This one was for the vertical scaling. This one was for the horizontal translation, and this one's for the vertical translation. So horizontal is x, vertical is y. So if I mean horizontal, I mean x, and I say vertical, I mean y. And that is how the skew works. So let us look at, I think that is it with the transform property. And I hope that you have understood all the transform functions. But that was for the 2D. That was for the 2D transformations. Now let us look at the 3D transformations. If you noticed, all the functions that we talked about, the translate, rotate, scale, skew, we're talking about the x and y axis. So if you only talk about two axes, that is the x and the y, those are just 2D transformations. But if you want to talk about the 3D transformations, you have to include the z axis. So all the elements that was like transform x, y, you also have transform z. Rotate x, y, you also have rotate z. So it's just the same thing, but now you include a third axis of the for it to show a 3D. So I'll just look at this rotate. I'll say just rotate z for you to see how the rotate can work. So I'll just move this and write here rotate z. This is the only thing that has been added in the 3D. But you consider this rotate 3D function. But let me talk about the rotate z first. So in the rotate z, you can provide any angle that you want it to rotate along the z axis. So I can say, let's say 20 degrees. So let's see how this works and how it differs from the rotate x and the rotate y. Then we look at the rotate 3D. So if you go to the browser, you can see how the rotate z works. You have seen that it rotates along the z axis. Let me just remind you of how x and y looked like so that you can see the difference of x, y, and z. So rotate x was rotating along the x axis. So if I adjust this value, you can see it's rotating only going up and down. That is the x axis. And if I put rotate y, you can see how the y was behaving. It was going left and right along the y-axis. Now rotate z is rotating along the z-axis, and that is how the rotate z works, like that, along the z-axis. So I think you have seen the difference between rotate x, rotate y, and rotate z. And there's this one called rotate 3D. Let me just show you here in the developer options, rotate 3D. So for rotate 3D, you don't only provide the degrees, you don't only provide the angle, you provide the coordinates of the x, y, and z values. So let me say just x1, y1, z1. These are the coordinates that you want or it's called the vector, where you want the rotation to happen at that point. Then I'll just provide what degrees do I want it to rotate. I'll say something like 45 degrees. So let us see how that happens. You can see how that happens. It rotates these degrees depending on you can see it rotating 3D, like it's moving at 3D level. That is 3D. That is what you call 3D. It's rotating both x, y, and z at those degrees that I'm changing there, and that is how we do 3D rotation. You can see it's going 3D. 3D means you can see all the three sides, not only x and y. You can see x, y, and z. And that is what we call 3D rotation. So I think that is it with the transform property. You can also try the other properties that you learned using you have talked about transform x, transform y. Now try transform z. You have talked about skew x, skew y. Now try skew z and see how the z differentiates from the x and y. And that is it with the transform property. So let us look at the next. That is after transform, we'll look about the transition. So now let us talk about the transition property. So you have seen how you can move an element, how you can rotate an element, how you can skew or scale an element using the transform property, and you have seen the different functions that can be used to do those things. So now let us talk about the transitions. Now transition, the CSS transition allows you to change property values smoothly over a given duration. The word here is smoothly. I'll show you how to change it smoothly and how it can change when it's not smooth. So I'll just give you an example here. You are saying now you're not talking about the transform, talking about the transition. Let's say a transition. Then you can see here in the note is saying that to create a transition effect, you must apply two things. First, the property that you want to add an effect to. So for example, I want to change the, let me style the div. I'll say div hover. I think we talked about this pseudo class selectors. This one here, like hover is the pseudo class selector. So I can just cite either container hover or div hover. I'm trying to select this div here, and when I hover it, I want something else to, some things to happen. So when I want it, when I hover, the width to change from 200 to something like 400 pixels. When I hover it, and the width to change that way. But I don't want it to change in a snap. I want it to change smoothly. That's where transition comes in. So transition, you put the element that you want to add an effect to. So me, I want to add an effect to the width. So I'll write here width. Then after how long, you can see you first put the property, then the next thing you put the duration. Duration is the time that it can take. And you can see here, if the duration is not specified, the transition will not have effect. And we'll see that in action. But now let me just put here 3 seconds. Let us go to the browser and see how this will look like. Oh, you can see that I forgot to change this H1. We are not talking about the transition property, not the transform property. When I got the VS Code, I'll change it, or you can just change it here. But keep in mind, if I change it here, it will not reflect in my VS Code. So I'll have to change it in VS Code again. So let me say transition. Not transform property, but transition property. That is the way we're talking about. So yeah, let's look at this div. You can see that I applied a style, and I said that when I hover this div, to hover is just to place this cursor on top of that div. When I hover it, I want the width to change, but I don't want the width to change in a snap. I want the width to change with a smooth transition. That is the work of the transition property. So you can see when I hover this width, you can see the width is changing, but smoothly, and it will change. And if I hover out, it will reduce like that smoothly. That is possible because of this transition property. You can see if I remove this transition property, you see I've turned it off. So if I hover, you can see it goes in a snap. That is the default behavior if the transition is not there. But if I want it to go smoothly, I can just add the transition. Then I can just specify if I want it to take a longer time, I can put here maybe say 5 seconds. It will take a longer time. You can see it slowly increasing the width. And that effect will take like 5 seconds. And if I move the cursor, it will go back smoothly for 5 seconds. And that is the basic idea of the transition. So now that you know about the transition, let us look at different properties that you can use with the transition to enhance your that effect, that smooth effect. So let's go to the notes and see some other properties. Before I go to VS Code, I forgot to show you that when I remove this, even if the transition is there, but I don't provide the time, the transition will not have any effect. You can see if I hover, it goes in a snap. But I put the transition, is still on, but when I hover, it goes in a snap. There's not that smooth effect because I did not provide the time. So this other thing for time here is important, because if you don't provide this time here, the transition will be useless. So you have to provide the time for you to achieve that smooth effect like that. You have to provide the time. So now let us go to the browser and change these things and learn about other properties used with transition. First, before I forget, let me change the title. Before I forget, I'll just change the title to transition. We say that if you change it in the developer options, it does not change here. So I have to change it here for it to change everywhere. So the next thing that we'll talk about is the transition timing function. This is the next thing that we'll talk about. You have seen that there are different values for the timing functions. This is the default one. We saw when you hovered our container, it started slowly, then it increases speed, then it went slowly. That was the default one. But if you want to change that, behavior, you can use these other options. There's this linear, is in, is out, and the cubic bezier. So we look at each one of them, but I want to look at each one of them at once. So I'll just create let me just remove this. I'll just style all the divs like that, because I want to create more than one div, and I want when I hover all the divs to have that. And then I'll come here to the VS Code and I'll create 5 divs. Div to have a class called let me just call it container, then times 5. And there are how many functions? I think there are 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. There are 6, so I'll create 6 times 6. I'll create 6 divs there. Then I'll call this container 1, this container 2, container 3, container 4, container 5, and container 6. Then I want to give each container a different what is it called, transition timing function. But first let me go to the browser and confirm that all my containers are there and still the transition is still there. By default all of them will be the is, because this is the default. So let me just go and confirm that the containers are there, then come back here and put the timing function. Let's go to the browser first. So if you go to the browser, you can see that I have 6 containers there, and each container I have styled all of them using this div selector. I used the element selector because I wanted to style all of them at once. So I just styled all the divs in my document to have a height of 100, a width of 200, then to have this transition. So all of them have that transition. But the thing that I want to change is this function. You can see now when I hover on it, it's going slowly, then fast, then slowly. That is called is. So I want to put this one I'll just leave it to is, and this one to put is in, this one is out, this one is in, is out, this one maybe linear, and this one something like that cubic function that you have seen. So let's go back to our VS Code and change the values of each element to be different, and each container should have a different timing function. So let's go to the VS Code and do that. So I think all of you have seen how the containers are. There are 6 containers, and I want each container to have different values. And you can see in the notes here that the is the default one, and it starts slowly, then increases speed later. Then linear is just the same speed throughout, but you'll see them in action. So let me just first I'll put some margin, because I saw that the containers were close to each other. So I'll put some margin bottom, let's say 20 pixels, for me to create some space between 2 containers. Then I want to style each container to have a different timing function. So let me select this first container. It's called container 1. I'll say container 1 like that. That is how we select an element using the class selector. Then I want to put the transition timing function. That. Then the first one, we say that we just put it to be the default one, that is. This is the default one, so it will just behave the same way. But the next, let me just 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. I think there are 6. So container 2, I'll put it to be, let's say, let us use is in, is out, then is in, is out, then linear. So this one will be is in, this one will be is out, this one will be is in, is out, is in, out. This one will be linear. Then this one is called cubic Bezier. Cubic Bezier is a function. You can put this timing function to have a function, and this function, this one lets you define how you want the transition to behave. So let me just put these values, then I'll explain to you when you go to the browser. 0.25, then I'll just put here 1. These are just random values that I put, but let's go and see how they'll be in the browser. So now we want to see how these timing functions differentiate from each other. So let's go to the browser and see how they differentiate. So if you go to the browser, you can see that this first container, I gave it the transition timing function to be is. So you can see it starts slowly, then it increases speed, then it ends slowly. That is the default one. That is for the is. Then this one, we said it was is in, and is in start with the same speed from the start. Is in starts slowly as a transition effect. It starts slowly, then it increases speed as it goes. Then ease out starts faster, then it ends slowly. Ease in, ease out has a slow start and a slow end. Then this one was linear, the speed is just the same throughout. This one was a cubic Bezier function, you can just define it. So let me just show you animations. I think the developer options provide some cool animations where you can see them. Where is that container? Inside the body I have this container. Let me just click the sixth one, because this one was for the Bezier. I think this one was for the Bezier. Where is that transition function? I can see it. This container 6. Let me just add it here because I don't know it's not showing. Transition function. Transition timing function, it's here. Let me put it to cube Bezier and to show you something. It cannot this apply because it's already applying. But cube Bezier have to add some values. Add some values. Yeah, I think it has applied. So I wanted to show you this. This is the thing that I wanted to show you. So you can see this, the first one here, it's linear. Don't know if I can expand this. I think you can see it. Let me zoom it in. Then let me just click it and small. As this one is linear, you can see this here on top here is the motion that is showing, and you can see the name here is linear. So linear just moves in a straight line. This one is in, is out. You can see it starts slowly, then it increases. That is how is in, is out is. This one is first out linear. This one is out. Then the Bezier, the cubic Bezier, you can now define your own. You can just play these values like this. I put this one here. Let's say I put this one here. I just played them how you can see like that. And you can see here it's called the cubic Bezier function. So you can just play with these values until you get something that you want. Then after getting the effect that you want, you can just copy this function and write it in your code. And that is how you can use the cubic Bezier function. You can just adjust it anyhow you want and just copy the values here and paste them in your browser. So I think that is it with the transition timing function. And you can see that you can specify the speed. All those functions, all those values are to specify the speed of the curve of the transition. So that is it with the transition timing function. Let us look at the next property. That is how you can delay a transition. You can see in the notes that if you want to delay a transition, you can use the transition delay property. So for example, if I want the transition 1, the first container, the transition to delay for some seconds before the animation starts, I can use the transition delay property. I can say a transition delay, then I can say you can set how many seconds you want it to delay. So I say I need to delay for 5 seconds. So when I hover on this container, before it starts the effect, it will delay for some time. That is 5 seconds. Then it will start the transition. So let's go to the browser and see how this is. So if you go to the browser, you can see when I hover, oh, it's not working. I think I placed it in the wrong place. Where is that function? I think we should. Where is it? Let us place it in the transition delay. Something like 5 seconds. Yeah, you can see it's now working. When I hover on it, it delays for 5 seconds first. Then after 5 seconds, it starts moving. That is how the transition delay works. I think it is not working because I put it in the wrong place, but now we have seen how the transition delay works. And also this transition is a shorthand property. We'll talk about it in a few moments. This transition is just a shorthand property. I think that's why the styles are conflicting, because I use the shorthand property and I'm using the different function at the same time. But you can see the transition delay. If I hover on this, it delays for some time. Then it starts the transition after the specified time. And that is how I use the transition delay. So let's look at the next property. The next property is the transition duration property. So this transition duration will not sit in the browser because I've already specified it here, unless I move it here. But this transition duration, you specify how long do you want your transition to take. It's just the same thing as this one here. So if you say 5 seconds, the transition will last 5 seconds. When you say 3 seconds, like there, it will last 3 seconds. Then the last one is the transition property. So this transition property, you specify which property do you want the transition to take place. I'll say here the width. So this transition property is the thing that we said here. We said width. The property to say there is the transition property. Then we said which property do you want the transition to apply to. So I showed you this transition earlier, but this transition was just a shorthand. The transition was a shorthand for all these values that we have talked about, all these 4 values here. The shorthand of that is the transition property. It sets all the 4 values at once in a single property. Instead of saying transition timing function separately, then transition property separately, you can use the transition shorthand property to set all of them at once. And that is what we did when we began learning about transition. So in this transition shorthand property, the first element that you put there, the first element you put there is the property. Which property do you want? Here, the first you put here is I'll just write here property. So the first element you put there is the property. Which property do you want the effect to apply? And you can set that property using this transaction property alone. But let's say this one is a shorthand. So here you just put the property. Then the next value here is the duration. And you have seen how you can set the duration using the transition duration property. Also, the next value you can put there is the third value will be the timing function. And you have seen how you can set the timing function here. Then the last value will be for the delay. And you have seen how you can set the delay. I think the delay is here. So this transition is a shorthand property to set all the 4 values that you have looked at them. The property, let me just put the property to be the first one like that. Then the duration, let me also put this one the second. Then the timing function, then the last is the delay. So if I wanted my containers to have this, I can say property is the width. I can replace this with width like that. Duration, I can say maybe something like 2 seconds. Let's say 2 seconds. Then the timing function, I can use any timing function that I want. Let me just use linear. Then the delay, you can put the time that you want it to delay. I can set it to delay maybe for 1 second, or for something like 0.5 seconds, so that does not take a long time. So allow me to delete all these other ones. I was showing you the effect with that, but you can use just this one to set the width. You can set the property. You have said the second one is the duration, then the timing function, then the delay, all of them at once using the transition shorthand property. So let me save this code and you can see how it is in the browser. So when you go to the browser, you can see that when I hover on this, first it delays for 0.5 seconds. I put 0.5 seconds, half a second, then it starts the animation. And it uses the linear timing function. So I've seen the linear timing function is just uniformly, and I think we saw how that is. And also the delay, I've put the delay to 2 seconds, and the delay is 0.5 seconds, then the duration is just 2 seconds. That is how you can put all the 4 properties using the shorthand of the transition shorthand property. That is how you can use the transition shorthand property. You've seen it is here. I use the transition shorthand property to specify the property that I want to apply the effect. That is the width. How long will the effect last? For 2 seconds. Which function do I want to use? I can say linear. And for how long do I want it to delay? For 0.5 seconds. And I've said if you click this one in the develop option, you can always change it to anyone that you prefer. So you can just play with it. Let's say I want it to be like this, but I want to adjust this time to be a little bit faster. So you can see it starts slowly, then it increases the speed rapidly let's say somewhere like here, then this one I decrease it to somewhere like here. So you can see how that is. Starts slowly, then it goes rapidly. That is the cubic Bezier function. You have talked of how to adjust it. So that is it for today's class. We learned about the transforms and the transition. But before I end, let me show you how you can combine the transform and the transition to create something that is appealing. Let us go to the browser, write some little code before I end the class. So I think I told you that here in the you can in the width you can just add more than one. Let me just remove these other ones, but you can just add more than one. If I want, let's say I want the width and the height to change at the same time, I can just say the width and also want the height also to change, and maybe the height to change for 2 seconds. So if I'll just say height, and let's say something like, let's say the height is now 100 pixels. I want it to go from 100 to 200 pixels. You can put more than one element. It's not a must to put one element. You can put more than one element, and let us see how that works. Before we talk about the transition, let us see how this will work. I've adjusted the width and the height at the same time when I hover. So let's go to the browser and see how this can work. So if you go to the browser and hover on any element, you can see that the width and the height are increasing, all of them at the same time. But their effect is different because this height, I didn't put it any effect. The height was just is. You said is the default one, but for the width, I put this cubic Bezier function, so it's going. You can see the difference, and you can see I'm increasing both the height and the width at the same time. But the height does not have a delay. This width has some delay, so you can see the width is a little bit slow because of that delay that I put. But the height is just has no delay. That is how you can adjust more than one property at the same time. In the same element, you can adjust more than one property. So now let's look at how you can combine the transition and the transform to create some good effects. So I can also add here transform like that. Transform. Then it transform for, let's say, 3 seconds. Then here in our hover, I can add the transform property here, and I say let me use the rotate because rotate is very beautiful. So I can just say rotate 180 degrees like that. So when I hover on this element, it will increase the width, it will increase the height, and it will rotate for 180 degrees. So you can see those are a lot of things that are happening at the same time. Let me just remove this linear so that they happen with the same effect and they have no delay. So the width will change from 200 to 400 smoothly within 2 seconds, and also the height will change from 100 to 200 with a smooth transition for 2 seconds. Then the transform, the container will transform for 3 seconds, and the transform that I'm using here is the rotate. So when I hover, the container will rotate at 180 degrees. Those are 3 things at the same time. So when I hover, I expect the width to change, the height to change, and also I expect the element to rotate because I use this transform here. So let's go to the browser and see how that will look like. So when you go to the browser, you can see when I hover on this element, you can see it has increases the height, then it has rotated 180 degrees, all of them at the same time, using that smooth transition. You can see how these elements are now rotating smoothly, just like that. So when I just hover on it, you can see when I hover on that element, it rotates. So you can just combine and create some good animations. This is just an example of how you can use rotate. You can also use the rotate 3D. You can combine any property here. You can also change the color. We talked about how to change the color with the gradients. You can also change the color as it rotates. You can do anything that you have learned using and you can apply the transition for the effect to apply smoothly. But keep in mind, we've not learned about animations. We learn about animation, and you can see how animation differs from this transition. This transition is just a smooth effect, but you can see how animation is even more better than this transition. But you can create some good transitions. If you're creative, you can create some good transitions. Let me just play with them a little bit. So that is it for today's class. I think by now you know about the transition element, the transition property, and you know how to use it. And also you know about the transform, and you can transform any element by increasing the size, by rotating it, or moving it from a different location using the transform property. So that is it for today, guys. See you in the next class. Peace out.